Yeah.
Hi, good evening. How are we doing today?
Good, thanks.
Good night.
That's good. That's good. So I hope we all had a productive week and we had the opportunity to read some of chapter 5. Did we?
Yes.
Okay, good, good. Let's see who this is speaking. That's Jonelle. Jonelle, you sure you're okay? Or you
Yeah.
just sound very far away?
Oh yeah, probably a little further away.
Oh,
Just
okay,
trying to get set up.
okay, okay, good. So we've been having an okay week today because I mean, almost all of my classes, they're always going to be so overwhelmed. We just tired and, you know, yeah,
I mean,
we
that's
good.
the regular stuff, so ain't nothing new but that.
Okay, okay, that's regular. Okay, I don't know why. I'm surprised or like, I hope we all gonna make it. Yeah, but it is difficult to work and do the classes. So I totally understand. But hopefully we'll get through this and we'll experience most of it. And
What I was to do, right?
I get some feedback. I think Victoria, can you mic please?
Sorry.
No, no problem. Yeah, we were just getting some background. Yeah, I guess the quicker we can go through this and just get some questions out, the quicker it'll end, and hopefully we retain some of this. Anybody started the paper or did the thesis as yet? Or no, we still have that on the back burner because March too far away. No? Okay.
I started, Miss Bullard. I did something.
Okay. Well, like I said, just gauge yourself so you're not completely overwhelmed and the deadline is closer. And I would have hoped that some of you would have arranged time off to complete the paper because you should get, I used to get a week study. I used to get a study week, but at minimum you should get 2 days. So remember to request your time and don't wait until you know the due date of the paper, but try and get it like perhaps the weekend before so you could include any minor updates that you need to. Okay, So enough about the papers. You all have it under control. Okay, so Jonelle, I think it was said that she would have read the first 25 pages of chapter 5. Were there any questions on chapter 4? In the last sections, they talked about the Chinese walls and um, disclosure conflicts and what have you. And I don't know if we really need to touch on that because in your first paper, I remember in the AML section, you all had to touch on conflicts of interest and what have you. So we are comfortable with the conflicts of interest. We have some examples and we know what happens in institutions in regards, and we are familiar with Chinese laws, correct?
Yes.
Okay, good, good. Okay, so when I perused Unit 5, I saw that it was a bit repetitive, and of course it talks about the risk management process and how it is the key to an effective regulatory compliance. It said a few times it spoke on the risk appetite of the business, but it kept stressing how all of this stems from the tone from the top. When you were reading, we're going to stop tonight on page 253. Did you get that overarching statement that this all stems from the tone from the top? How the board acts, how senior management acts, the culture within the organization. All of this depicts on whether or not you have an effective system in place. Did we come to that conclusion when we were reading? Janelle, since you said you would have read.
Yeah, I guess it reminded me of when we did that assignment question. I think that was in the last course on culture, the compliance culture and all of that. And the focus on the board setting the risk appetite and actually, I guess, doing as they say and just not saying it, but showing the staff it so it could really permeate through the organization.
Correct, correct. And just this week we had an example of that. I don't know if any of you would have watched, I guess, this whole impeachment and the way Trump acted towards the inauguration. But what they both him and his wife Melania did was they gave, I guess, goodbye speeches. But they did not follow the tradition that would have been followed for years. And so in her speeches, one of her speeches, she stood up and she said, we must put country above self, and we must, be kind and what have you. And she went on and on. And then in this same tone, she did not welcome the new president to the White House. She did not invite the wife. There was supposed to be two invitations. She did not stand there with a nice gift like how Michelle Obama stood there, even though it was the opposing side, and they definitely did not attend the inauguration, right? And so, of course, all over social media, persons talked about how is she putting self? This is a good example right now, Melania, to put self before, put country before self, and you are not doing it, but you are standing up and you are saying these words. So again, you're either reading a script, it's a baseless statement, there's no value in what you say, and therefore, if you can act this way, of course, by large, we can act this way. And of course, we see, persons may think that I'm way off, but the net effect of this is what happened at the Capitol, and 5, persons were killed. And so, in our organizations, a lot of times we hear a good speech. We do have those policies and procedures. There's documentation. There's a vast amount of information out there. However, there's no enforcement. Nobody is ever given sufficient time to read. Nobody is given, sometimes it's not in layman's terms, and sometimes it is, but it's so comprehensive. Nobody, there's no time given to read. There's no explanation. There's no training outside of the statutory requirement for AML training. And definitely we just stand up and we speak, but we don't we have, I guess, the old adage of do what I say, not as I do. Are we experiencing that in our organizations? Or only Miss Bullard had those experiences back in the day? Anybody out there? Anybody?
Ms. Bullard, I think that's for a lot of organizations, you find that um, the policies and procedures are there, but there are sometimes in some instances where management, um, senior management tries to, I guess, get around those rules and policies and procedures. And then when you challenge them, it's like you're the bad person, but if it's not in the policy, then, and especially if you're not comfortable with carrying out a task or assignment, then I don't think you should do it. But for me, I feel like that's everywhere because I experience that all the time.
Okay, so what do we do? So we do not, have a bunch of basis statements where, of course, the chapter talks about the key to an effective risk system is, having a vision, having goals, having values, having policies and procedures, but ensuring that they are not just basis statements, but they are carried out. Like you say, senior management tries to circumvent them, when it's beneficial to them. So what is the
Miss Bullard, I
Yes.
want to say too, coming from a recent experience with the teaching that we're receiving, you're knowledgeable, and when you do maybe say, but that's not in the policies, they come at you for it. But I mean, with the knowledge we have, we know that we have rights to speak. In the past, you didn't realize that you had rights to speak, and but the tone at the top prevails.
Okay, so again, like I said, this book talks about the tone. So in the past, there was only training for the staff. Now there's a board engagement policy. I think Central Bank came out of it, came out with it in 2018 when they made, the updates to corporate governance. Now, so the board now has to be included in that training. Do you think that is sufficient now to change the tone from the top to ensure that the board is actually engaged?
Is there any follow-up to see if the board is actually being trained? I'm curious.
Well, just like the same statutory requirement for the staff, central bank, like I said, and we'll talk about that when we talk about the risk assessments. They asked me to send me to them my training logs. And of course, I only had this would have been in 2019. And so in 2018, at that time, I don't think the board engagement policy was out here where they made it mandatory for them to be trained as well. And so in 2018, my training log did not include the board. Of course, in 2019, they had asked, they said, we noticed that you didn't send a log with your board members. So immediately, you had to go and hold a corporate governance training with an AML training with the board and have to sign off. They also asked in a survey that they sent around, and the Wolfsburg principles for correspondent banking, the Wolfsburg form that you fill out, they also asked, are your consultants, are your third party employees, which are the external asset managers and the business producers, or and the consultants, are they being trained? And of course, we didn't want to say no in a survey, so of course we said yes, and then immediately we had to go and have them acknowledge, because what we did with the account opening packages, we sent our AML policy, like a condensed version of it that was applicable for them going to AML. We specifically said, these are the laws of the Bahamas, because these external asset managers are around the world. They are in Switzerland and France and what have you, and some of them are in, non-compliant jurisdictions, or they are not Schedule 1 countries. Some of them are in Schedule 2 countries, which means, and we talked about that before. I mean, those who are in intro, so we should know that, Schedule 1 countries are like Switzerland, the US, and Cayman, where Schedule 2 countries are like in Antigua and Barbuda, where they have some policies in place, but not the full gamut of, the AML framework in place. And so they wanted us to show them the same log to say, and I imagine their checks would have been, you had 34 employees, we wanted to see 34 signatures. And then you have 10 board members, we want to see 10 board members. And then they asked us for the statistics regarding our consultants and our business introducers. And I guess we had like 50 of them. And so they wanted to ensure that those 50, so they were checking again. Remember, when the laws were updated, both central bank and the Swedish Commission created these analytics departments. So they have relationship managers there. Each bank or financial institution was assigned a relationship manager who had now that hands-on approach. So gone are the days now where we just check the box and say, oh yeah, we do it. No, they asked for proof. And they responded immediately because I filled out that survey back in 2018. And I said, yes, oh, we can't tell central bank. No, yes, 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 yes for everything. And then they came back and said, okay, Ms. Bullard, we need source document for everything that you said yes to. I mean, I always tell you all that story. I fell off my chair. Because I said, really? And it took me weeks to go around the whole organization and gather all this information to submit along with my survey. Okay, so yes, I imagine the regulators are checking now, and they have this hands-on approach. And again, all of us are on a learning curve. Remember, the credit unions were just regulated by the central bank, and then the accounting firms and lawyers and real estate by the Compliance Commission. And so it's, I guess, a staggered approach, because imagine working in a credit union and operating for years and not having to do all of this. Now the law has changed and now it's mandatory. So we just jump up and say, we doing this? No, it's very hard. First of all, they gave us a bunch of legislation that, that we didn't know what to do with. Nobody really trained us. Then, so compliance had to learn, and implement all of those policies and procedures into the internal policy of the bank. And then you train the persons and you train the senior managers and say, this is the change. We can't do it that way. And then you needed systems. And I know somebody's been talking, I think it's Hal Gray, who's been speaking of a system now. Yeah, they implemented the system, but it does not work. So there are a lot of parts to make this, the whole system effective and to make it work properly. Okay. But again, from 2018, the regulators have been on us, especially with the risk management, the risk assessment. Remember, we use a rules-based approach where we followed the rules and we tick the boxes. Now there is a risk-based approach where each organization has to, tailor, do a self-assessment and create a risk assessment according to, their business services and their products, and then they create an appetite. And that's what the book talks about. Once you create an appetite, or how to create an appetite, unit 5 first tells you, it's like the first part of unit 5 is the policy, is what we do, and our values and our principles, and how, why we do it. And then it moves on to different appendices where it tells you, it's like the procedure part, how to do it, what you would need to have in place. Okay.
Ms.
so-
Bullard, I have a question, please, before we go on. The board of directors are people that are qualified, lawyers, CPAs, attorneys. Why do they need training? I'm just curious.
Okay,
Aren't they
so
already trained?
they are trained in their industry, but they have to know the appetite of the business that they're making the decisions. Because remember now, they delegate their responsibility. They are accountable in the end. So you could delegate your responsibility to senior management or to compliance. However, if the bank fails or you have to ask questions, they're still accountable. So it's two different things. And I think the book extensively talked about the difference between accountability and responsibility. So while senior management is doing the day-to-day operations, this is not your accounting business or your church or your law firm. This is the Royal Bank of Canada. So if you're going to sit on the Royal Bank of Canada board, you need to know the appetite of the business, the risk framework, what the beliefs, the values, and the mission statements are. And just like we need continuous training, and we have to keep up with our continuous professional development hours and attend seminars, and they need to do the same. And as the law changes, they need to ensure that they keep abreast. So if you're a banker, it's okay. You're gonna get the same information with bankers get. But let's say, suppose you're a CEO of an insurance, but on a banking board or a lawyer on a board for a bank, you get the training that's tailored to law firms or based on the products and services that your law firm offer, which may be different. You see, so that's why they need a specific training for every board that they sit on, just in case, So some things may overlap if they sit on more than one board or they work, in a law firm versus a bank. So, and that's okay, but you want specific training that is tailored to what your internal policies and procedures say. Okay? And then, like you said, some of them are trained. For most parts, there's always a pastor on the board. And I don't know if that pastor there, they sort of do the prayer and keep the peace. I don't know the rationale, but it seems like every single board has a pastor there on that board. And so one person right from my ICA class who was an inspector at the central bank said, at one point they went into an institution and they were doing an inspection. And of course, it just happened to be at the same time they were having a board meeting. And so she saw the pastor at the water cooler and was, she decided to have a little water cooler conversation with him because, he was a pastor that she always saw on the TV. He was very popular and what have you. And so she went over and said, "Hello, sir, how are you? Blah, blah, blah." And she said, "So how do you handle your pets?" And he said, because I told this story before you in intro and intermediate. He said, "What is a pep?" Right? You all know what a pep is, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Right. And so from that, she went back to the central bank and said, "Hey, we have to ensure that these persons sitting on these boards, you cannot be a pastor and say you sit on a financial services board and, oh, I'm the pastor, I'm just in for the prayer. Or oh, I'm a lawyer. I don't know anything about banking. So if you take up these positions, you don't have to come 100% qualified, but you have to go and get some training where so you could get proper oversight and proper representation. You can't just say, "Oh, it's the pastor, I don't know what that." If you want to sit on that board, you must be trained. And now, like I said, from this board engagement policy that central bank has administered, put out, there are there's an ethics policy that came out with it, a suitability policy. There's a time frame in which you could sit on the board. After, I think they put the maximum is 7 years. After 7 years, they need somebody fresh, some fresh ideas, something new, unless you are like the CEO of the company. So there are, various criteria that now has to be met. And normally the corporate governance person or the compliance will ensure that what the policy states is actually being carried out. Okay. Okay, so back to chapter 5 and risk management. And again, like I said, if you would have been in intro and intermediate, perhaps this may be just a refresher for you, because I would have said all of this before. I even had a person in the intro class, you know, we had to write a paper on PEPs, and they, of course, these acronyms, you know, are used in different industries all around the world. And she wrote me an entire paper on engineering because it was, she didn't realize, I mean, even though we would have spoken about it in the class, politically exposed person, there's an acronym in the engineering field for proper engineering something, P, and she wrote an entire essay. And then when I told her, well, this is a, you know, AML class, she was very upset to say, but, you know, I wasn't specific enough to say that I just put write the differences or what is enhanced due diligence when it, you know, refers to PEP. She said I didn't put politically exposed person. So, you know, you want to make sure that, you know, everybody is straight and clear. But I guess she had fallen asleep and not talk back to Miss Bullard in the class, and she go and do that paper. What y'all think? Lucia and Katrina and Kareem and Jameen, who ain't talking back to me for 3 weeks now. Jameen, you there?
Well,
Well, not for 3 weeks, Miss Bullard, because I was talking
Oh
the
my.
first class. This
Okay,
was
yeah,
the
Lucy,
third
I hear
class.
from you. I hear from Jameen.
Yeah, Miss Bullet, listen, I want to apologize now. Last week, we're in the middle of a PCI audit right now, so I couldn't even make class last week. So I
Oh,
apologize for last week.
okay, you excuse.
I'm here
I know
now.
you're very overwhelmed. What did
Very
God-
overwhelmed, madam.
Yeah, what did Godfrey, my good student who helped me so well at the Securities Commission the other day? You there? Godfrey? Godfrey must be there. And Tira, who I catch in the last class. Tira, you there? Y'all speak back to Miss Bullard, please, because I can fall asleep in one of these classes if you all don't talk back to me. Okay? Okay, good. So let's just, again, like I say, the book, these chapters, a few pages that we read, the first 25 pages of chapter 5 was very repetitive. And again, it sound the alarm about the tone coming from the top, but I always like to know the history. And I guess for the purpose of your paper, I'm going to share my screen and let's talk about, and everybody who would have been an intro should know this. Where does this risk management come from, and where does it start? And so of course we know if we would have been an intro, it starts with recommendation 1, FATF 40 recommendations, recommendation 1. We all know that, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, right. And so after recommendation 1, does anybody know what comes next after the recommendation? Where would we find, how does the framework work? We have international standard, Bahamian law, the regulators guideline, and then our internal policy, correct? Okay, nobody talking to me. Okay. Okay, so yeah, so that's just how it works. So I want to start off by, we want to read recommendation 1 from the 40 recommendation and what it says. And see, then we want to read what the law says, what the Bahamian law says. And then we want to look at central bank. Then we want to look at the national risk assessment. And then we want to talk about how do we implement all of these things into our organization. Where does risk appetite come from? What should be in it? Who should know what the risk appetite says? What questions do we ask? Okay, so this has to be interactive, because if y'all just want me to keep talking, just keep talking in. Okay, so I guess no, any volunteers to read or no? Anybody to read recommendation 1? Do we need to turn on our camera so I can see everybody to make sure that we engage?
Miss Bullard, I can't see your screen. It's still off?
Yeah, my camera is off, but I'm just saying, if I'm wondering if we need to turn on the camera so everybody would be engaged. Is that what needs to happen? So we can make sure that everybody's engaged.
No, we listening, we listening.
But you gotta participate. Okay, so we need somebody
We're
to.
here.
Okay, so who's gonna read recommendation 1? Should I just pick somebody?
Ms. Bullard, I read a lot last class.
Yeah, you did, Kim, and so did Lavon. And let me see. So Tira, we haven't heard from you.
Not a problem. I'll read recommendation 1.
Okay, so again, we want to just understand how it starts and where it comes from. So we're looking at the 40 recommendations, everybody, and a part of this is in your paper, so this should be helpful to you. So, okay, Tira, go ahead. In fact, we're gonna read recommendation 1 and 2. Okay, go ahead, Tira.
AML, CFT policies and coordination. 1, assessing risk and applying a risk-based approach. Countries should identify, assess, and understand the money laundering and terrorist financing risk for the country and should take action, including designating an authority or mechanism to coordinate actions to assess risk and apply resources aimed at ensuring the risks are mitigated effectively. Based on that assessment, countries should apply a risk-based approach to ensure that measures to prevent or mitigate money laundering and terrorist financing are commensurate with the risk identified. This approach should be an essential foundation to effective allocation of resources across the anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism regime and the implementation of risk-based measures throughout the FATF recommendations. Where countries identify higher risk, they should ensure that their AML CFT regime adequately addresses such risk. Where countries identify lower risk, they may decide to allow simplified measures for some of the FATF recommendations under certain conditions. Countries should require financial institutions and designate non-financial businesses and professionals to identify, assess, and take effective action to mitigate their money laundering and terrorist financing risk. 2, national cooperation and coordination. Countries should have national AML CFT policies informed by the risk identified, which should be regularly reviewed and should designate an authority to have a coordination or other mechanism that is responsible for such policies. Countries should ensure that policy makers, the financial intelligence unit, law enforcement authorities, supervisors, and other relevant competent authorities at the policy making and operational levels have effective mechanisms in place which enable them to cooperate and, where appropriate, coordinate and exchange information domestically with each other concerning the development and implementation of policies and activities to combat money laundering, terrorist financing, and the financing of proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. This should include cooperation and coordination between relevant authorities to ensure
Compatibility.
Yeah, this should include cooperation and coordination between relevant authorities to ensure compatibility of AML CFT requirements with data protection and privacy rules and other similar provisions.
Okay, so of course, a paper talks about data protection, so you can use recommendation 2 and recommendation 1 because it talks about risk assessment as well. So thank you, Tia, for reading. This is where it all starts. Recommendation 1, recommendation 2. Countries should assess their risk. Once they would have assessed their risk, then they put the controls in place. They could do a self-assessment and they put controls in place to combat any risk that they are subjected to. So of course, we have PEPs, we have trust accounts, we accept accounts with bearer shares, we do correspondent banking. All of these are risks, and we are to document that these are risks, and then we are to put some controls in place to mitigate the risk. You cannot eliminate the risk, you can just mitigate it. Okay, so from that FATF international standard, then we have our FTRA, which trickles down from the country level to the organization level, where it talks about supervised financial institutions, what they should do in order to identify any risks associated with the products and services that they offer. Okay, so you want to quote recommendation 1 and 2, and then you want to go, the Bahamas law is the FTRA section 5 that asks each financial institution, and this is a financial institution is under the gaming board, which are the web shops, under the insurance commission, which are the insurance companies, the non-financial businesses, which are the law firms and accounting firms, and the real estate, which also, just like the credit unions, have been regulated by the central bank just recently. In 2019, the Compliance Commission is now the regulator for those non-financial businesses. So all of these entities have to roll up into one to create a national risk assessment for the country. And so this is our national risk assessment. And of course, if we would have been an intro and intermediate, we would have seen this before. So for the benefit of the person who wasn't there, this is the national risk assessment that they compiled in 2015 and 2016, and I think it was approved in 2017. Now, back in 2017, this would have meant that this came out before the laws were in place. And so, or before the updates of all the anti-money laundering laws in 2018. So of course, we could just look at this table of contents and we could see that, this is gravely deficient. However, they accepted it there at the time when we submitted it. They came in, I guess, based on this submission, and they did the mutual evaluation report where they found that we were deficient in the 22 of the 40 recommendations, and that's where we had to go and do our updates. So a part of our problem is that the non-designated financial entities were not even regulated. So we weren't able to get information from them. A lot of the policies and procedures weren't being enforced. So just like Ms. Bullard, who tick, 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 and said, yes, 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 we are doing. In some instances, I had to create policy and put it in place because it wasn't in place at the time when I sent it to the central bank. And there are some securities businesses that were not fully regulated, or all the policies and procedures were not in place. So what has happened? There has been a lot that has happened from 2018 to get us up to date. And recently in Parliament, and you all should know this because we would have been reading our newspapers and keeping abreast of what's been going on. I'm trying to pull it up right now for you. Recently in Parliament, there was an update. There was a controversy between the opposition and the government, whereas the FATF was supposed to come in and visit us in May of 2020. However, the pandemic came, and therefore they were unable to come. And because they were unable to come, they were unable to check our action plan that we had put in place, to satisfy all the deficiencies that we had. And so subsequently, the European Union was on our backs about the taxes and what have you. And so because they weren't able to, confirm that we had indeed, put the laws in place and they were effective, we subsequently got blacklisted. And not only us, other countries got blacklisted. And the argument in Parliament was between the opposition and the government, saying that other countries would have asked for an update, a virtual update, and they wanted to question as to what the government was doing. Why didn't they ask for an update? Why did they allow the country to get blacklisted again, rather than say, since you can't come in May, we will accept the update virtually. Now, the government had requested the update virtually, but they did not get a response. But we subsequently got blacklisted. But in terms of the national risk assessment, I just want us to read so we are all aware where we are in regards to this risk assessment. So what I am going to do is just, I have it highlighted and I have it on screen, and I see R.L. Russell. Are you there? No answer from R.L. Russell. S. Kalma, are you there?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so can you read to us, please, where we're at with our national risk assessment? Just the part highlighted in blue. Can you see it since it's highlighted? Or you want me to deselect it so you can see it better?
Hello?
Hi,
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay, I was answering you.
Oh, no, I didn't have
Okay.
the answer.
Okay. So you asking me to read?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
What's highlighted in blue?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
The Bahamas conducted a national AML CFT risk assessment over the period 2015-2016. National Risk Assessment report was submitted to Cabinet and approved in December 2017. The National AML CFT Task Force utilized the World Bank Risk Assessment Module, surveys, and intelligence to complete the NRA. The NRA covered a review of all sectors of the financial services and designated non-financial businesses and professions, law enforcement, prosecutor, and the regulatory resources and structures established to regulate, supervise, and enforce AML CFT requirements in the country. The summary results of the NRA were shared widely with all stakeholders via industry briefings, roundtables, and sector meetings. High-risk sectors were found to be money transmission service sector, legal and real estate sectors. Post-completion of the NRA of 2015-2016, in 2019, the Central Bank and the Compliance Commission joined forces and completed several studies into various sections of the DNFBP category of businesses, falling with the ambit of the Section 4 of the FTRA 2018. The studies have assisted in confirming that the automobile sector of the country is low MLTF risk, and the domestic banking and gaming sectors were identified as low risk. The CC Gaming Board, excuse me, I have some noise. My neighbors are very noisy and it's annoying.
Okay, we can't hear the neighbors. That's fine.
Okay, good. And Central Bank of the Bahamas intend to collaborate on studies of the international real estate and international gaming sectors before the end of 2020 to verify that the level of MLTF risk they pose for the country. Further plans are afoot and the working group established to refresh the 2015-2016 NRA, commencing work in the last quarter of 2020 and completion before March 2021.
Okay, thank you very much. So what that is saying is basically, we changed our laws in 2018. This national risk assessment, of course, is outdated. And now we have all the sectors being properly regulated, and the regulators have gone out to them with, I guess, the same surveys that would have gone out to the banks in 218. So the credit unions who are recently regulated should be filling out those surveys and providing source documents. So anybody in the credit union got to fill that out. Don't be like Ms. Bullet 2 years ago and say yes and don't have the source document. When you say yes, make sure you have the source document. And then the real estate, the lawyers and the accountants, they also have to do it. So again, if you're doing a national risk assessment, you have to do it of the entire country. So insurance has a part to play, gaming has a part to play. And at the point when we did this, gaming was just being regulated as well and being legalized. So all of that is why, you know, it's not done and it's outdated for so long. And back in the intro class, we would have gone online and looked at the overall country rating. And of course, we didn't see one since 2014. Since then, they have, you know, copied and pasted the 2014 rating that gives us like a medium high rating. And of course, if we know when we're high risk, if we become high risk, that requires enhanced due diligence, more fees, less people want to do business with us. I told the story about when we went to New York, we tried to open an account so we could bring our trading desk from Switzerland, and we were simply told, you know, by Morgan Stanley and Wells Fargo and whomever, they don't do business with high risk jurisdiction. So we were not high risk, but we could not prove that we were not high risk because the last rating was from 2014. So the government is, you know, working, they have to put the laws in place, get everybody regulated, send out surveys, get all this information in, and then, you know, because just like how I would have had to provide source document, of course, the government would have to provide source document to prove that, you know, the rating remains at medium and, you know, it's sufficient. And of course, there are many initiatives that the governor, the central bank, the Securities Commission, the various regulators have put in place to ensure that our rating does not go to high risk. Okay, so international standard, Bahamian law, central bank guidelines, and this is the central bank guidelines that talk about risks, the different various risks, residual risk, monitoring risk, inherent risk, establishing risk tolerance, your risk appetite, and the entire risk process, which the book covers. And if you're regulated as a central bank, this is where you would go with the Securities Commission, you go to their AML policy. If you're regulated by them, the Insurance Commission should have the same information, but it shouldn't be different. For the most part, I see that the central bank has the bulk of the information. So I always use this as a, you know, our guidance. From this central bank guideline, each institution should have their own policy and procedure in place. Okay, and of course we are in ICA. We should be very familiar. We should be walking around. That should be like our Bible. Okay, so everybody should be familiar on where it starts, how it starts, and how, you know, how it works, and where the country is at this point. And so the book goes on to talk about risk being defined as a combination of the likelihood that an event will occur and the severity and the nature of its consequence if it does. We take on these risks because, of course, there is benefit and there's opportunity, and the more risk you take, the more money you make. So for the most part, organizations, they, you know, take on a lot of risk. And basically there's no one size fits all approach for every organization, because some are different in nature, some are different in size, some are different in complexity. So this is why they actually do a self-assessment, because they will have 100 versions of the type of risk assessment that is needed. So you really have to tailor it to your business. You have to tell your board has to be aware what your bank does, because you may work for a Canadian bank, but your appetite, you know, the Canadian banks are Royal, CIBC, and Scotia. They may not have the same appetite. Royal may introduce or give out loans to persons without salary deduction, whereas Scotia may say no, it's not within our risk appetite. The only persons we can loan money to is internal person, staff, or person who can give us a what is it? What do you call it? The salary deduction. Okay, so it just really depends on what your bank chooses. So that's why you have to tailor it, and all of the information will be different. So you don't want to copy, even if you take some information from a larger bank, you want to ensure that you scale it down so it fits into your institution. Okay, and once we would have decided what risks we are going to take on, this is how we create a risk appetite. For it to be effective, again, we don't want to put it on paper. We don't want to and lock it away and nobody knows what's in our appetite. The book goes on to say that the appetite should be complex. It shouldn't be it shouldn't be simple, because that could make it dangerous. It should be comprehensive enough for a complex firm and with multiple risk exposures. It should be measurable. And when they talk about measurable and then they go on to talk about relevant, it just reminds me of just like the goals that we set each year. We have to set SMART goals. Goals are supposed to be specific. They are supposed to be measurable. They are supposed to be attainable. They are supposed to be relevant and then timely. So basically, that is what the book is saying in terms of when you write your risk appetite. It should be correctly defined, approached, and implemented. Again, we don't want to just write it on paper and stuff it in a drawer somewhere or save it on our system and nobody ever looks back at it. Questions you will need to ask: what type of risk we are going to take and what controls we are going to put in place. For instance, if you're going to offer like trust services, one of the controls you should put in place is that we need a person on staff that is STEP qualified. Depending on the number of accounts you're going to open, you may need more than one person on staff that is STEP qualified. That's a control. Okay, that's a risk that you're going to take on because trusts are separate entities. They are separate vehicles and there's a lot of risk associated. They are considered high risk. And so therefore you want to ensure that if you're going to take on such a high risk product, you have sufficient controls in place to mitigate any risk. And of course, we know that we cannot eliminate risk, but we can put controls in place to ensure that our institutions are protected from money laundering and terrorist financing. And so the book talks about 5 key questions to consider. Again, what significant risks is the board willing to take? And again, I use the trust. And then again, are we going to do business with PEPs? Again, there's a lot of risks involved with PEPs, especially now that we see our politically exposed persons are coming before the courts. We want to ensure that, hey, if we had an account that was under the name Sheehan Gibson and he was brought before the court, are we going to stand that reputational risk? Especially if we are keeping his funds and he was charged with money laundering. Of course, the bank's name would have been dragged through the bank that all this money would have been at the Royal Bank of Canada where he held his account. And so you want to ensure that we don't want to incur any type of reputational risk, associated with that. So most times, organizations say, no, there's so much risk involved. We will not offer service businesses to PEPs. Then they select countries. Again, like I said earlier, the more risk you take, the more money you make. So of course, we know most of the world has like Venezuela sanctioned. And so we attract a lot of accounts. We don't have Venezuela sanctioned. So we attract a lot of persons coming in from Venezuela trying to open an account in the Bahamas. But of course, because it's sanctioned by the rest of the world, there's a lot of risk involved with that. And so in accepting that type of business, then we have to ensure that we have sufficient controls in place, not only for Venezuela, for any sanctioned country or any high-risk country. So in your risk assessment or in your risk appetite, you write down exactly which countries you are going to do business with. And one of the tests that I saw that the regulators came in and they carried out is they checked our risk appetite and they said, okay, you do business with Venezuela. There is a policy and procedure in place in terms of sales, generating sales in each country. And they wanted to ensure that we are aware of the policy and that our salespersons were trained, because in some countries, you can be sent to jail if you do not follow the policy and procedure of the country. A lot of after the market crash in 2008, we were Royal Bank of Canada, but we were the Bahamas division. And before, we were able to pick up the phone and just call anybody anywhere in the world. But Canada, had put something in place like most countries, cross-border policy, where it said you cannot call directly to a Canadian client. What you would have to do is you would have to call somebody in Canada, and Canada who is a salesperson, and that salesperson would talk to the Canadian. So they put a cross-border law in place that you could not just, come into the country and drum up business without that Canadian getting a percentage. Because of course, that's what it means. Money is involved, and most of those salespersons get 15 to 20% of any business that they bring. And so therefore, their percentage now would be cut down. If you're going to get 20% of any business that you open in the Bahamas, if you get it from Canada, Canada now says you have to call a salesperson in Canada to make contact with their Canadian citizen. And so therefore, of course, the sales is now split. Are we seeing those cross-border laws? Are we, any of us working in offshore, and we're familiar with it? Anybody? And anybody seeing these cross-border laws? No? Well, Lavon, are you familiar with the cross-border laws?
Yes, with our new business, our onboarding, they're not in our country. They're international.
Okay.
Yeah, so we don't really have that kind of problem. Yeah,
Right.
they located them to the States.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so each country has their specific law that you must follow. And so that was one of the checks and balances that they did against our risk appetite. They said, in our risk appetite, we had the high-risk countries that we are going to do business with, and they wanted to ensure that we had the cross-border policy. They wanted to ensure that we had somebody that spoke Spanish. They wanted to ensure that is this person going to visit, because you are required to visit your customers like at least once per year or every 2 years, because they're high risk, because this country is sanctioned and they are risks with travel risks and stuff, and with going to Venezuela. What was the plan in place to ensure that contact was kept with these countries or with the persons in these various countries? And so again, you cannot just write, like I said, gone are the days when you say we are just going to write that these are the countries we are going to deal with, but you don't have the control in place. So the control in place was to ensure that you had somebody who dealt specifically with Latin America, or somebody who dealt specifically with Asia, specifically with Europe. They could speak the language, and they were able to either visit, and they paid attention to the economy, and they were either able to visit or do a teleconference with them. Okay, and so basically that's what the risk appetite is about. What risks are we willing to take on? If we do take on some high risk products and services, what controls do we have in place? Do we have qualified individuals? Do we have persons with sufficient experience? And these are the various like backup or controls that you would document that are in place to ensure that the risk is mitigated. And again, you don't want, like I say, just write down basic statements, or write down statements that actually make sense, but the person who has to carry out the task is not aware. So a lot of institutions, you know, they would say, oh, this is confidential, or this is only shared at the executive level. No, persons need to know what their responsibilities are, what they are accountable for, and whether it makes sense. You know, you can't, laws change, there's lots and lots of information. You can't do it by yourself. So the people who are involved need to be able to understand exactly the strategy of the business and how it works, and rather than go out and drum up sales from, you know, areas that we don't do, but we don't do business with PEPs. But you know, Shane Gibson is my friend, so I'm gonna try and open an account, you know, to give him our account opening forms and what have you, then to come into the business and be told that, well, we don't do business with PEPs. Okay, or we don't do business with persons who have been charged before the court, or what have you. So you want to have all of this clearly documented, and you want the persons within your organization to be aware of, you know, what policies you've taken on, your risks that you're taking on, and you want to train them in areas of the controls that you put in place, because you want to make sure that those controls are effective, and you need to test them to make sure that they are effective. And you need to ensure that all relevant persons are trained and they fully understand exactly what your strategy is. Okay? And so it says, what significant risks the board is willing to take? What are the strategic objectives of the organizations? Are they clear? What is implicit and explicit to those objectives? Is the board clear about the nature and extent of significant risks? Is it willing to take in achieving its strategic objective? The law, not the law, but in the Wolfsburg principles, they say you offer correspondent banking, and we offered correspondent banking to Barbuda and Antigua. We were required to go down there every 2 years. That's expense. The salesperson wanted to travel with us, as well as the compliance department. Was the bank willing to take on the expense to travel to Antigua and Barbuda to look at their compliance department to ensure that they were following, you know, procedures, they were following Bahamian law, because essentially, even though they didn't have the laws in place, they had to follow Bahamian laws, because persons would have come into their bank where they didn't require, you know, a passport or a national ID to open up the account. But if they wanted to send wires, they had to produce the passport and the national ID. And so we had to fly down there to ensure that they were indeed, you know, getting passport or the national ID, the driver's license, or what have you, for those customers who, you know, requested wires. Okay, so is the bank going to take on that expense, or again, are we going to put it in writing and say we're going to offer this service, and we know the Wolfsburg principle requires us to fly down there, but we're not going to take on the cost, or we don't even train the person who's supposed to fly down there to know that they need to go and take a visit. Okay, in terms of the clients in various jurisdictions, we had an incident where there was a client in Italy, and again, the AML policy and procedure said you are to, normally salespeople stay on the road and they visit, they fly all around the world. They are not allowed to spend at Royal Bank. They were not allowed to spend more than 25% of the business that they would have brought in. And so they could go flying around the world and they, you know, drumming up business, but if they don't bring anything in, at the end of the year, they have a problem. And then sometimes a lot of them were paid on commission. And so the bank would have paid for the trip, for them to travel, the dinners and lunches out with the clients. However, a lot of persons tried to reel back when they say, oh, this is the end of the year. I already fly to Canada and Switzerland and Italy. I only bring in 2 accounts, and the value on those accounts were very small. I can't afford to go and see the rest of these clients. Then what do I do? So there has to be somebody to check these things, because a lot of times that is exactly where risk, would have occurred. We put policy in place, we put procedure in place, but the bank ain't willing to spend the money, or the salesperson knows that I can't go over my limit of the 25%. And so I can't travel or I can't make contact with these people. And so therefore, um, I just don't do it and things slip between the cracks. And so, of course, the workaround was always, just a very technological age, and you could do everything by phone or by voice call and video call or what have you. But what we found at Royal about 5 years ago was that the majority of our clients, to open an account with us was $250,000. And the majority of our clients were over the age of 60, and they were not familiar with technology. They did not trust technology. And so if you go and tell them you're not going to fly there and sit down and talk to them, they can close out their account, because that is, the what they are used to. They, I've even had some people who say, we ain't even use the ATM. No, I need to go in the bank and my book need to be updated. So that was the culture of the person, or that was what the person was used to and most comfortable with, and they didn't trust any other way. And so if you weren't going to fly there and take the cost to fly there, they were about to, take their $5 million out of the bank and go elsewhere. So we ensure that when you write these this appetite, somebody there from finance to tell you this is an estimation of what this cost. Ensure that we have sufficient money to be able to do this, or we may need to take this out of our, our goals, out of our appetite. Because if central bank comes in and tests it, we have to carry it out for, throttle. We can't have, half of it. Okay. And then we want to ensure oversight. We have audit, we have compliance. In fact, we have heads of the departments doing reviews before audit comes in, and definitely before the regulator comes in. So those companies that do not have internal audit, you have to push that your managers or the heads of those departments carry out those audits for you, because I know internal audit is very expensive, and I know the regulators are now looking at that. It depends. Each regulator said they would have risk rated the business. So each bank has a risk rating, whether they're high, medium, and low. And what you are supposed to do is get audited based on whether you are high, medium, or low. And so if you offer PEPs, accounts to PEPs, if you deal with Venezuela and like Iran, the sanctioned countries, you offer correspondent banking, you offer bearer shares, more than likely you are a high risk institution. And so that means you are subjected to being audited each year, which is a cost. And I know just audited financials is required separately. That's a separate audit that costs like $150,000. So audits are very, like I said, very expensive. It's not cheap. And so sometimes it makes sense to have an internal auditor to do these various checks and balances rather than get an outside company. So a cost is involved, of course. So when you write this risk appetite, you want to ensure that you may be taking on more risk because you're thinking about the bottom line, but you want to ensure that you can afford the appetite that we may all want a steak, right? But we may only have a chicken budget. Okay. So tell me, Jonelle, in terms of appetite, do you have any questions from what you would have read? You see that there's no one fits all size, no one size fits all approach. You see that, cost is involved. So you want to ensure that you write a smart risk, you have a smart appetite that you can afford. And then you want to ensure that you put controls in place to protect your institution against any of these risks that you're taking on.
Yeah, but I mean, my thing is, as I guess, let's put it this way, like as a compliance officer, if the board tells you that their risk appetite is high, like just put it forward, that's their risk appetite. You've seen that and everything like that. But let's say the budget doesn't provide for that, I kind of way, like it's difficult to put in provisions to kind of manage it when even in my mind, they don't want to manage it, kind of way. I've been in institutions where it's in a sense, their risk appetite is high, and that's it. They have no intentions of managing it. They're not interested in managing it. It's just, that's what they after, that's what they're going to go with. And it's like, how do you kind of fit the framework, so to speak, to really adapt, I guess?
Okay, so what I've seen from the regulators, because we have some, banks who are very savvy and people like, we give like the regulator gives guidelines and they pose questions to you. And so then you have to, try, please show me the cost associated with having this appetite or the cost associated with the controls versus your balance sheet, and let me know if there are any variances or something like that, because you don't want to. I see the regulators while they are enforcing, they don't want to be, like I said, these very savvy banks, they go to the news or like what is the news closing down right now? The restaurant or the Compass Point is saying because the government refuses to put blah 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 or tell us before or what have you, and so you don't want that type of media or, bad media. And so therefore, I see, like I said, the central bank normally uses moral suasion. So you have to find a constructive way to point it out to them that, hey, you want steak every day, and I understand I want steak every day too. However, you have a chicken budget. And if you buy steak every day, what is going to happen? What is the point of all of this? Because trust me, they will see you they will sell you 10 dreams. What is going to be the end result? What are we trying to avoid? Why is all of this necessary? Jonelle?
To avoid getting shut down.
Okay. So you have to just as savvy as they talk to you, they dress up in their Gucci suits and they come from Switzerland and they know it all and they, what have you.
Yeah.
Just as they as savvy as they are, you make them give you the answer. Show us your balance sheet versus your operational cost. And again, with this appetite, it's not only we can sit down and brainstorm and come together, then we are going to document the controls. You need systems. You need systems in place that work efficiently, right? To help support all of this appetite that you want. And if you don't have the proper systems in place, then again, you end up with, we have a bunch of baseless statements. We dress up, we look good, but we end up like Enron, right? So you have to ensure that it's within your budget, okay? You have to define responsibilities for employees within the job or role descriptions is closely linked to performance management. So again, each year, everybody is reviewed and that's when big bonuses come out. And like, I think I would have told this class, when all the banks failed in America, the CEOs were still getting $1 million payout or a bonus or what have you. And so Obama put something in place to say, if your bank failed, you don't get that big payout and you don't get that big bonus. Okay? So you want to ensure that you spread the word. It's in person's performance appraisal, it's on their job description. They understand that, they have to perform. They can't just write a bunch of statements, check the box. I worked in an institution where we had a meet like 3 times a week and did nothing. We sat down and talk and talk and talk, and people came up with good ideas, and that's all we ever did is talk. and nobody ever went back and shared what the talk was to their department. Nothing was ever implemented. And just we talked, we did everything on paper, nothing in action. And so this is why you're encouraged to test what's on paper. And when auditors come in or regulators come in, that's what they say. Give us your very nice paper that is articulated. Don't let it be somebody. We had somebody who used to work in communications. And so they were very good at essay writing. And man, everything that we said we were gonna do sounded so good. Okay, and nothing ever happened. So this is why you want to test it. And when you see issues occurring or audit issues coming up, that's the first thing you do. I've seen central bank said, okay, we have so many deficiencies in one area. Let's see what the root of the problem is. Send us their CVs. Let's see if you have sufficient education or sufficient experience in this department. Okay, then let's look at their job descriptions. And another test, what they did to me is they didn't give me my job description. They told me, so tell me what to do. What are your core functions? So that was a test. And I used to do that as well at the Royal Bank. I used to call the Family Islands and I used to ask them, what are your core functions? What do you, because a lot of people don't know. People just show up to work because everybody's overworked and overwhelmed and they do what they were taught to do. Or they try to figure it out. Nobody else, they try to figure things out 10 times before they pick up the policy and they read it. Okay? And so the culture of your firm has to be that everybody has a job description. This is the training that is required. When you go into these institutions on your first day, they give you 10 big binders of paper that nobody ever reads. And you throw that in the back of your car that day and you never look back at that because now you got to go start work next day. That's what really happens. Okay. And so because that happens and the whole institution operates like that and nobody is enforcing that, hey, let me give you a little test to ensure, that you caught on to what the policy says. Let me test sustainability. Let me see how you operate. But if they don't like you, in 3 months they are going to let you go. This is the purpose of policy and procedure. This is the purpose of the 3-month probationary period. We're going to teach you how to do something, and then we're going to check sustainability after the 90 days to see if you caught on. But that's never done because we give you 1 day to read 50 policies. Nobody sits with you and trains you. Nobody gives you, there's no insufficient time to train. There's no follow-up. There's no test to ensure you know what you're doing. Most of the things I tell you is from my judgment, not from what the actual policy say, because the policy say that. But that ain't how we used to do it. And people will tell you that. And so somebody listening should say that that's a gap. So let's fix that, but it's normally not fixed. Okay, so all of this goes back to the culture in the institution. Okay. Any questions so far? You're very, very quiet. Very, very quiet. Okay. So there's an example. It says a key principle of risk management is that there's clearly defined ownership and accountability for managing risk across the organization. So 3 roles are identified, which is the risk owner, risk coordinator, and then the risk manager. And then it goes down to saying that there's an implementation of the 3 lines of defense. And I remember I was in that institution when the 3 line of defense came out and nobody even knew what to do. And so it takes a while. Once you implement and you send it out there and tell your staff, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take a while for them to find out which line they fall in. And so they say normally the first line of defense is the frontline employees who would spend time with the customers or be client facing, right? And then the second line is compliance, and then the 3rd line is audit. Okay, so what do you do if you're the front line? Are we sharing our knowledge? Are we training them to say this is suspicious? if somebody's outside of their profile, this is how you identify an unusual transaction. These are the steps you take. No, most of the times we are afraid to share our knowledge, right? We don't want anybody to overtake us. We're so concerned about our job security is hoarding all the information that we have, not sharing it with anybody else. And so really and truly, they don't even know what to look out for. Okay? They don't know what to look out for. And so here it is, we have this risk appetite with all our strategic goals. We have our controls in place. And only the risk person know who don't see nobody who's locked away in a back office. Have all this information. So we don't really know what the control in place is to protect us if we offer correspondent banking. And we send in buyers every day. We just know that we are told to go to 2 trainings a year. We don't know why we have to go. We don't know what law is associated with. We don't know the history. We don't know where it comes from. And some of us don't care to know. So one of the biggest problems is hoarding of information. And the next one is, there's so much information out there, people don't even care to know. It's easier just to show up to work and I need to do the easiest thing. Okay? Then there is information again that when you share at the executive level, and for years, you know, I was in Royal Bank screaming, we call it key risk indicators. So each month, management would send out a list of, you know, the rest and the, you know, what could possibly shut us down, and we wanted to know where we were at. So at one point we had 800 clients, and then automatically it dropped to 500. And so over a space of like 3 months, and so we wanted to find out exactly what was happening. So we implemented, we went back on increased controls again. It was already a requirement. However, we were the managers, nobody was enforcing it until something went wrong. And again, that's what happens. We are always reactive rather than proactive. Because if we were completing our key risk indicators every month, we would have seen every month that more than 100, you know, accounts was closing out, right? But no, we didn't pick it up until it was 300 accounts closing out. And so on that key risk indicators form, the responsibility, you know, private banking opened the accounts, but the responsibility was on the operations department to record how many accounts were closed. And so I would fill out the portion regarding account closing. I would say 10 accounts closed, and the amount of money that we lost is this amount. And so there are flags in there, red, green, and blue, sorry, red, green, and yellow, just like the red light, that would say if more than 3 accounts close, she is to turn, you know, that indicator is to turn yellow. If it's more than 5 accounts closed, it is to turn red. If more than $100,000 was lost, it is to turn yellow. If more than 500,000 is lost, it is to turn red. And when it turned yellow, she was able to, and when I say she was the private banking department, she had to give an account of what happened, what accounts closed and why they closed. If it turned red, she had to write an entire, like a 200-word essay on why these accounts closed, what she did to prevent them from closing, and what her plan is to bring in more revenue. So it made her accountable. So every time, you know, the private banking manager, what she did was implement a procedure right away to say, before an account closes, you know, they are supposed to exhaust all avenues, offer the person some free products and services, fly out to the person depending on if they had more than $5 million on the account, and then let her speak to the person, you know, and she would fly with them to retain this business. Okay, and so that's how serious it was in terms of keeping this business. So she had to then, you know, she exhausted all avenues and trying to keep those relationships. Then she had to write an essay to say, you know, this are the steps that I took to ensure that these customers are happy and these are you know, accounts are not closing. So all of this was, you know, early warning signs to ensure that such a substantial amount accounts didn't close because we so busy and the accounts just closing and we ain't paying attention to the figures and what happened, you know. And so all of that was now a part of her job description. And she ensured, the private banking manager, she ensured that every single account that was closed came to her person, and like, she got all sorts of marketing material to send out to those customers and to make sure that they were happy. Okay, and so that's how the KRIs help you. That's how this tracking mechanism that nobody has time to do, and that was just for, you know, account closures. We had that for dormant accounts, um, you know, any other type of losses and stuff like that, like in the on the teller side, um, you know, you're allowed to have a difference up to 250, but if you go up to 500, it turns red, and you know, what are you doing? And then you have to put that you offer training, and you let them go to cross training, and you let them, you know, read some manuals, or you had to say what the fix was. It was, so it made you accountable, you know, before the problem grew very large. So, and that worked for us. Okay, and so most companies, I would encourage them, you know, to have those key risk indicators and not wait, you know, and it gives you a little reminder because we had all the different functions on that. And every month you put some indicator to it. We had some fraud regarding the safekeeping, and you know, that brought our attention to safekeeping, you know, something that was stagnant for a very long time. So all of these things gives you a little bit of reminders and it helps you, you know, and all of this is a part of your, um, you know, putting in policy and procedure and risk management strategies to help you, you know, reduce the risk. Okay. And so another good thing with key risk indicators is, you know, it helps you to know where our sales and profitability risks are. Where should the firm make the next investment? What problems it may encounter? What risks are out there about which are not thought about? How can firms evaluate the best strategic direction in an ever-changing global risk landscape? Okay, and of course, on those key risk indicators too, we had policy and procedures that were updated, or the laws that came out, and there was no internal policy. So there was a tracking mechanism already in place, or we were Canadian and a lot of laws came down from Canada, but we had to do a gap analysis. We had to compare it, Canadian law versus Bahamian law, and change those policies so it could make it more understandable for the staff. Okay, so there are various things that you could do and put in place to ensure, you know, to assist you with mitigating these risks. Okay, so is there a difference between compliance risk and regulatory risk? Compliance risk is the threat that poses to an organization's financial, organization, or reputational standing from violations of law, regulations, code of conduct, or organizational standards of practice. Regulatory risk, the risk of having the license to operate withdrawn by a regulator, or having conditions applied either retrospectively or prospectively that adversely impact the economic value of an enterprise. Okay, so compliance risk can arise from breaches of internal standards and controls, as well as external regulatory or legal standards and breaches, and can lead to problems for businesses. Both will have a negative impact economically, reputationally, and even on the ability to continue to operate in the regulated market. Regulatory risk also arises when there's a change in regulation. And let's talk about that. What happened in 2018? There was major change in all of the AML laws, or 90% of them. Okay? Or when you know, a new regulator comes, you know, online, and that's what happened with the non-financial businesses, the real estates, the law firms, and the, you know, and I say it a million times, so by now all y'all should be well aware. So everything was revamped in the field, and so the central bank the laws were revamped in the field. The central bank guidelines were updated to include all the new laws. So now that means your AML directive now has to be revamped in the field and updated. Yeah, internal policy had to be changed, and you had to go and offer, training to your staff. It doesn't happen overnight. Okay, but because these laws were partially in place, remember the Bahamas used the staggered approach. You know, so as we don't wipe out the financial services sector right away, some of these were on the books. We were just not doing it. But in 2018, when these laws came out, right away the regulator enforced, the risk assessment. They said we need it right away, and so there was stringent guidelines. I think it was Jones 22nd for the risk assessment, AML risk assessment, and then they wanted an enterprise-wide risk assessment. And again, screaming throughout the entire book, that's what it talks about. You cannot, this is not a one-man band. All of this is tied to the culture of the organization and the tone for the talk. Everybody has to be involved. Everybody has to be involved. Everybody has to share their knowledge. Everybody, compliance is everybody's business. Risk is everybody's business, because everybody now goes to jail. The law was expanded because it used to just be the, 3 regulated functions: senior official 1, senior official 2, and compliance. Now everybody has a part to play, and everybody goes to jail. With the 3 lines of defense, if you are in risk or in compliance, you better ensure that they are trained, because again, there's no way you could, manage the entire organization. Everybody has to do their part. And so you want to, ensure that they are trained, and not only trained, but they understand that there's management buy-in and then employee buy-in. When the enterprise risk assessment came out, of course, the AML part would have been completed by compliance. That was due on June 22nd. And, I think it was the Securities Commission or they said $5,000 a day for every day it's late. And then a lot of persons didn't do the AML one, and then the enterprise-wide one, which means risks associated with finance, risks associated with HR, risks associated with credit, that was due in October of that year. And so you wanted to ensure that all the departments were on board, because there was no way, even though they wanted the risk and compliance department to do it on their behalf, we don't know. We're not fully trained in all these departments. I mean, we might have, I worked in operations and audit, and I never worked in credit, and I never worked in finance. So I don't have that, in-depth knowledge in those areas. And so when I went to the head of credit, he basically said, but this is risk, so shouldn't a risk officer do this and whatever? And at that time, we didn't even have a risk officer. And so, of course, all of this fell in the hands of compliance. We just had to make sure the deadline was met. So there are various issues, like I say, that cause us not to be able to meet these deadlines. But you have some institutions that they don't meet any deadline. They go out to the regulator and they ask for an extension to an extension to an extension, until the regulator has to step in and say, enough is enough. Okay, and so we have had that experience where everything would have changed, and we just had to fall in line. And unfortunately, some of the institutions that were not able to fall in line, somebody had to be, we're being internationally watched. We had to prove that everything that we was doing was effective, and we were putting these laws in place and actually carrying them out. And so Yeah, some institutions, felt the effect of that. Okay, and so the book goes on to talk about their different risk management standards, and the one that I'm familiar with that that we leverage on and we just basically follow the steps is the Costco one. And I don't know, are we familiar with the Costco standards? Anybody? Krishna, again, are you familiar with the Costco standards?
No, I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, so I'm gonna pull it up on the screen, and then all of this helps us with implementing methodology, because a lot of times, like, we put policy and procedure in place, we say country ratings, or this high rate risk country, but what makes it high risk? Where do we get that information? And like the people from intro and intermediate, they know methodology, and they know that don't come and tell Ms. Bullard that Iran is high risk. You have to tell me how you didn't make that determination, where you got that information from. Okay, and so you get that information from the Basel Committee or Transparency International, and so you want to write down your methodology, or because there are many standards out there, there are many models out there, so you want to document where your information is coming from and what model you are following, so it could be tested, and everybody could be aware of how the process should work. Okay, so I have methodology, and the book talks about the overview of risk management and this different risk management standards. So just so you would be aware of one of them. Can you read for us what I have on the screen, please? Is Krishna still there?
Hello?
Hi, are you there?
Hi,
Can you
I'm
see the
here.
screen?
Yeah, I can see.
Okay, can you read for us, please?
From in 1992?
1992, yeah. I just want to give you an example, because when you get in these positions, or even if your institution is sharing their information with you, you want to ask them which standard, which model they are using to put these controls in place. Okay?
Okay, and see if I can make this a little bit bigger because it's super tiny on my screen.
Okay, let me see too if I get. Is that better?
Okay, much better.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
In 1992, the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission developed a model for evaluating internal control. This model has been adopted as the generally accepted framework for internal control and is widely recognized as the definitive standard against which organizations measure the effectiveness of their systems of internal control. The COSO model defines internal control as a process effected by an entity's board of directors, management, and other personnel designed to provide reasonable assurance of the achievement of objectives in the following categories. First, effectiveness and efficiency of operations, reliability of financial reporting, and compliance with applicable laws and regulations. In an effective internal control system, the following 5 components work to support the achievement of an entity's mission, strategies, and related business objectives. 1, control environment, which includes integrity and ethical values, commitment to competence, board of directors and audit committee, management's philosophy and operating style, organizational structure, assignments of authority and responsibility, and policies and procedures. 2, risk assessment, which includes company-wide objectives, process level objectives, risk identification and analysis and managing change. 3, control activities, policies and procedures, security, application and network, application change management, business continuity or backups, and outsourcing. 4, information and communication, which includes quality of information and effectiveness of communication. 5, monitoring, which includes ongoing monitoring, separate evaluations, and reporting deficiencies.
Okay, thank you very much. So again, the book goes on to tell you, there are different standards, there are different models. You guess in the list the iOS 31,000 2009 risk management principle guidelines, the risk management standards, ISO risk management risk assessment technique, and COSO 2004, which is this enterprise risk management integrated framework. So you want to, if an overview of your risk management process, you find a model and you say, they ask you which model are you going to use or which standards are you following. We are studying the COSO standards, okay, to risk management. So once you figure out which model, which standard, and again, like I say, for a lot of, this is not shared with the staff, but the staff should know, again, because it affects the entire organization. You want to know how it works, and then you want to really test the effectiveness. You can't test it if, and know that it's sufficient for your department if you don't even know which model you were using. And so let me go back to sharing on the screen. I think I have some more information here to share. Let's say, and so in this is just a copy of the risk assessment. Again, it has the risk category, it has the risks. So we say credit risk on clients, the description of the concerns, loss on credit risk granted to clients. Okay, and so we say the likelihood is medium, the impact is medium, and then the gross risk is medium. So for the most part, this was a very small institution. Again, like I said, it should be tailored to the institution. You have to use metrics, the number of clients, the assets under management, the number of money, the number of staff, and what have you, the products and services that you offer. And once you would have listed the various different risks, you see operational risk, liquidity risk, and there's comments next to each one. Then you go down. So on operational technology risk fraud, there is, it should be listed here somewhere. On operational risk on internal fraud, you say, what is the risk of fraud committed by the people within the bank? And then it's low. Again, this was tailored to a particular organization. And the operational risk of external fraud, again, fraud committed by people outside the bank, it was low. And so you don't just want to say these things, then you go down to explain it. What controls did you have in place? And again, operational risk, we say it was low because we have a 4I principle in place, standardized recruitment process, standardized staff evaluation process, background checks, new data leakage protection systems implemented. So again, when we put this regulator access, send us the 4I principle. That means 4 different, two signatories are required. That means 4 eyes, 2 separate people will check it, and they wanted to see our policy regarding that. Then we said standardized recruitment process. Again, send us your onboarding of staff information. Let us see if it was relevant. Then we said we do background checks. Send us the policy regarding the background checks, all of that. They wanted to check to ensure that it made sense. And then we say the first line of defense is the front office will receive regular training and reminders on callbacks of clients. This is consistently implemented. The second line of defense, compliance does not have any direct oversight of the callback procedure. Third line of defense, callbacks have been specific focus of the internal auditor for the past inspection. He does a thorough check over a large sample of instructions with no adverse results. Next audit, November 2019. Then there's board oversight, and then the directive, what directive is applicable to this. And so for the most part, some of these would have been separate policies. Some of them would have been, all in the AML policy or in, account opening policy, how to reduce the risk of operational risk, internal fraud and external fraud. Okay, so this is basically what the regulators wanted when they said, self-assess yourself, document your risks, and put the controls in place. And so, of course, this is just like a small portion of it. Then you would have, listed all the various functions and what you do to, mitigate the risk. Whether you have two signatories, whether you have compliance signing off on high risk, there's a procedure in place to ensure that if a client, sends a request for information, that transaction is checked, it's verified. One control could be that one department receives the information, and that is very important because we saw some fraud regarding that, where a person would have sent in a first request and he did not have proper authority to say he could only withdraw, say, $5,000. His limit was up to $5,000 for him to sign for, and he sent us a transaction for $100,000. And so the bank was able to block that transaction, but one of the controls the bank had in place was to document every request that came through the bank. And so his employer found out that he was stealing based on those transfers that he had sent into the bank that we had recorded, even though they had not been processed. So when the employer was trying to, figure out how he stole this money, if we were not vigilant and realized it was outside of his limit, we would have processed them. But thankfully, we have that callback system in place, and then we go and check to see, because we do business on behalf of companies who allow staff to sign on their behalf, and each staff member has a various limit. So we have to go and check to make sure Ms. Bullard is signing within her limit, and so that helped them to be able to, stop that in his tracks, and let him go before he was able to run off with their money. Okay, and so of course we all know about risk estimation, quantification, where we categorize, by high, medium, or low. And again, like I said, a metric is determined by the size of your business. On 241 at the bottom, they talk about what is high, medium, and low. For an offshore jurisdiction or a offshore company, high may mean $5 million or more. For a commercial bank, 500,000 may be high, so it, like I say, it's no one size fits all approach. You have to determine what is high in your business, because if we said in the business that we operated, we said $100,000 was considered a high risk transaction, to open an account with us, it was $250,000. So, and that was the lowest amount of money that we ever saw come into the bank. And so therefore, all of our accounts or all of our transfers were over $100,000. So every single thing we did would have been high risk if we said our limit was $100,000. Whereas on the retail side, perhaps they see transactions between 100 and 50,000. And so their high would be 50,000, so you have to look at statistics and different mechanism within your business then to determine what is high, medium, or low, and then you would risk rate them or categorize them to, you know, ensure that you have all the correct metrics in place and it makes sense. Because again, you don't want constant hits. We set it up in our system every transaction over $100,000 give us a hit, give us a flag. Every single transaction will be flagged. Whereas in the retail side, if you put it too high, give us a hit. Everything over 5 million, almost every transaction will go through, whether it's in the person's profile or not. Okay, so it just really depends. And then we learned about risk evaluation. We learned about risk treatment, having analyzed all risks to which it may be exposed. The business must decide what it should accept and which needs to be mitigated. An obvious starting point would be to prioritize the risks that are rated as high in terms of both consequence and probability. If there are a number of these, an order of priority among them may need to be decided. Again, if we have PEPs, we have correspondent banking, if we have bearer share, you know, you have to decide, you know, which risks you want to take and which you want to avoid altogether. Then risk treatment is the process of selecting and implementing a course of action intended to modify a given risk. This part of risk management process usually occurs only if the risk, once evaluated, is outside of the appetite. If the risk falls within the appetite for risk, then it might be accepted. If it falls outside, then it may be rejected. Okay? Then risk transfer can an option be where the firm wishes to continue with the activity in question, but chooses to either outsource the activity to a third party or take out some form of insurance. Again, on most, in fact, I think this, if you have a securities arm, one of the requirements of the Securities Commission is that you have insurance on the signatories. And so, you know, again, you can mitigate risk, you can eliminate it. So if somebody does infiltrate your system and departs the business, there's an insurance that protects your signature. So unless you were extremely negligent, you know, there's an insurance that is required to be kept to protect you from that. And risk avoidance is the option when the risk poses are too great. Risk posed is too great when the firm considers the relative benefits of continuing to provide either a product or a service. In this situation, withdrawing from the market in question is the preferred option. And again, we had that incident where we offered trust services, the trust officer resigned. They tried to source a new person. The new person said, well, you know, with all this policy and procedure and all what is required, she almost wanted double salary. And so they decided that, hey, let's just give up our trust license and sell the trust business. And that would have been cheaper rather than trying to, you know, the cost that it would take to have the knowledgeable or experienced people in place. Okay. And so after all of that, some commentators refer to the 4 T's: tolerance, risk acceptance, treatment, risk control or mitigation, transfer the responsibility, not the accountability for the risk, and termination or risk avoidance. Okay. The risk assessment process assists in effective and efficient operation of the firm by identifying those risks that require particular management attention. You want to ensure or consider the following questions. Is the current internal control effective? Is a new control proposed? To what degree will the risk be eliminated or reduced? Is the new proposed control cost effective? And we talked about all of that. What is the firm's risk appetite? Can it simply accept the risk of doing nothing? Of course not. Monitoring. And after, like I said, you would have put all of this in place, share it with the staff so they understand your model, your strategy within the appetite, it's not in the appetite, and why. Then you want to monitor. And it's a continuous process. And normally the risk department does this, audit does this, senior management does it, and things still slip through the cracks. So a lot of times people don't know. So you need that external eye to come in and say, hey, the law says this. You may have been interpreting it wrong, or perhaps there was a gap in your policy and procedure where you didn't even include it. Okay, and so if it's not included, then you have a way bigger problem. Okay, so that's the purpose of the external audit, to help protect you and help you fix some stuff before you have a regulatory breach and the regulators come in. Okay, any questions? You're still there? Lucia, you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, you awake? You don't have no questions?
I'm awake. I'm listening.
Okay, but tell me, what is this? Are you going to retain any of this, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fine. Okay. Okay.
Bullard, I have a question.
Go ahead.
We've covered a lot of material with this risk ID identification and everything. I find when I write about it, I write too much, and I think there's a portion of this question that we have to answer with a risk assessment of the so all that information we just went through, how do we get that? I'm trying to wrap my mind around how we get a portion of it inside this paper.
Okay, so last class I went through specific steps, right? That you should have put in it. But remember, nobody gave me feedback, so I just went through. So listen to the recording on the part on risk and what you should include, and then if you need more information, let me know. Because again, it's a lot. It's very comprehensive. I can't remember exactly what the
okay, the recording from last week.
Yeah, whatever was it last week that when we went over the paper?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So listen to that part on risk, and then I'll look back at the paper, and then we could go over it again to make sure you can scale it down, and in shorter parts that are relevant.
Okay, thank you.
Because basically, let me see. You're talking about deficiencies. You're talking about data protection, and you're talking about confidentiality.
Yeah, because you have to do a risk assessment of the situation before you could apply the controls. You have to assess what you have before you could implement the changes, right?
Right. And so I would start by saying we are on a learning curve, because your jurisdiction is the Bahamas. We know all the laws were repealed and replaced in 2018. We know enforcement started in 2018. And so this is what you have to say. Why these deficiencies could have happened, because it wasn't clear. The law was updated, and prior to the update, nobody was really trained on it because it wasn't really enforced, and there was no awareness. Now we are learning that all these things should be shared, and if they're not being shared, you should go and ask questions. So people simply didn't know, right? And so now the law is a process that people go through. You give them the knowledge, the understanding, then they believe they actually have to do more work than they used to do, and then they act, right? And so the data protection laws were just updated. I don't know which year. I think they were 2019. And then as we speak, in 2020, the confidentiality law was just updated. Right? So we was saying, quoting up until last month in December 2020, section 19, and now it's section 70, 7. So all of that contributed to, you can use from that approach that these things are newly implemented and now just being enforced. And so now that we are aware of what the law states and what we should do, now we identify these are the risks and these are the controls we need to put in place. And definitely one of those controls need to be somebody with sufficient knowledge who can train the staff on what the law states and what should be done in regards to data protection and confidentiality. And then you could pick out some of the stuff that Ryan said. Okay, and that's how you can determine which controls you put in place.
Okay, all right, thank
Okay,
you.
yeah, so look at it again and then let me know. Yeah, okay, so we'll talk about reputational risks and financial risks and market risks and conduct risks. With it says more words from Warren Buffett. It takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. If you think that, you would do things differently. And this is what I'm saying about chapter 5, how chapter 5 deals with risk management. This is the policy part of it. What you should do, our values, our goals. And the appendices seem to be how you should do it. Okay, so just so you would know, we just going through the what you should do. And then you'll get to how you should do it in regards to risk. Okay, so it takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. And if you think about that, you'll do things differently. It's easy to damage reputation, but much more difficult to repair the damage once it's done. For this reason, it can be argued that reputational risk is a key factor in strategic decision-making for firms. And I know, I was at Royal for 16 years, and there were many, many persons that were brought before the courts. And there were many persons that stole and did all sorts of stuff. But Royal Bank simply said, they did arrest people. A lady sat next to me crying. She had stolen $25,000 and planted it in her backyard. And I stopped my work and I say, oh, I gotta help you because you newly married and you just had a baby, and I gotta help you find. I went through her, and I was working in internal control. I went through every GL, every transaction she did that day. We reenacted, and the next day she was on the TV, handcuffed because they found the money in her backyard. And she sat at my desk and cried all day, and I was hugging her and everything. And Royal Bank, they would charge you that you get brought before the courts, but then they don't show back up because the more times that is played, every time you go to court, the reputational risk where people say that, oh, these employees is thief, let me go and take my money out of Royal Bank because they have a bunch of people that is thief. Even with I was working at the trust department, and we were making lots of money. It was very profitable. However, we were being sued by the French government. And so they said, we are going to close this out because France had already put some articles in the paper, and it was in the French news, it was in Bahamian news, and overall it was an embarrassment for the Royal Bank Group. So they said, close out trust so it wouldn't be appealing to the media. And so they took the money and invested it in capital markets. So it was not that, the trust business was not profitable. And so, the whole entire bank closed down. And so, and that was trust in Cayman, in Bahamas, in Bahamas only, yeah. But to avoid that reputational risk. So that's the net effect, and that's how serious it could be.
Ms.
Okay.
Bullard,
Yes.
I have a question. Okay, now with reference to that example you just gave, you're saying that like the banks, they're trying to avoid reputational risk by not going through with the charges for the employees and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
But I feel as though the opposite is, for me anyway, I look more circumspectly at an institution who doesn't pursue the charge if you find that your employees are being dishonest or they're stealing. I look more, I look at you more side eye like that, because then I feel as if I can't trust you with my money if you're not going to punish somebody who is going to be doing something like that.
Agreed, but you would have to know if I didn't say that just now, you would have never known it.
Well,
and that's exactly why they don't want it in the media.
In a large country, yes. In a country like ours, not really.
Yeah, but for the most part, you see those they being brought before the court once, and that is it. And this is why now you see money laundering as a predicate crime. All of this helps too with it. So they can only be charged with, fraud or stealing by reason of employment. They are now charged with money laundering. And so they now you see the people from CIBC and what have you being held accountable and what have you. And so if Royal Bank continues not to show up to court, then they will, they will get a separate charge. Right.
Okay.
So now it's, it's in the forefront, it's now being watched. But Lucia, people just didn't know. I knew because I was in the meetings where, we was falling off our chair and saying, stop sending these people to me. And then they putting them on TV the next day. I, waste my whole day helping this person. Just lock them up. And people, we even talked about what is legal doing? Why are these people not being prosecuted?
Right.
And that's when, the reputational risk is too great. It will cost us more to prosecute them than what they would have stolen.
Okay.
And we're talking about people who steal millions.
I know. I know.
Yeah, so.
She was trying to apply the money tree. Eh?
Well, I don't know what she was told, but she take my whole day. I want to see her just to tell her some words, crying on my shoulder. But anyway.
Oh, goodness.
And stopping me from doing my work. Okay. And so then if there is financial risk, firms are exposed to many different forms of financial risk, liquidity and management risk, funding management, capital calculation risk, credit risk, tax reporting compliance risk, accounting policy risk, budgeting and capital planning risk. And so the regulators, they have this administrative policy guideline that says, by a certain day of the year, different deliverables are required. And if you're not sending them in, they're fined. So that helps them to ensure they meet the regulatory deadline. So they are not fined. And then there's market risk. To pay attention to the market that you're invested in, who your target market is, conduct risk. Again, everybody seems to be getting a slap on the wrist. We see our good Edison Sumner, was he would have been, I guess, banned from the Securities Commission for 10 years. He is still very active in many other forums because I guess it's really who you know. And so considering that, I don't know, he's still on many, many boards, and I guess he still has a contribution, but ethically, should he really be sitting on those boards while he is under his ban, or isn't it like going to jail or some type form of probation? You're on probation, so should you not sit down? And so the people could say that this will deter me from bad conduct and doing the wrong thing because I'll have to sit down at least. But I don't know. I guess it depends on who you are. Okay, so risk management systems and tools should be integrated into the business, so using them to be a part of ongoing activity. In other words, by applying best practice, risk management becomes a business as usual. And it's so bad, and I always say the Swiss are less conservative than the Canadian banks, and so we work in Swiss institutions. They don't, some of them, they say it's not law, they're not following it. And so they don't even agree with best practice, and that causes, you see, like a lot of the Swiss businesses failing. I mean, well, all the banks have issues, but to me, the Canadian ones are way more, conservative than Swiss. So I don't know, the regulators perhaps need to, they do document some best practices, but it's very hard for these, for you to enforce these things. If they would, they, a lot of them just look at the bottom line. And like Jonelle said, they don't even care if they could afford it. So it's up to the regulator to, put a hands-on approach on them with enforcement and ensure that they understand that what they can afford from what they can't afford. Okay. In managing regulatory risk, compliance professionals must understand the full detailed requirement of systems, controls that are in place, Successful implementation and ongoing use of these systems and control is continuous process using planning, implementation, measurement, learning how, learning flow was highlighted in the review section. And then I guess there has to be a technology buy-in because almost it has to be me because it can't be everywhere I go that the tech guys speak a different language. And it's like, it's just so difficult. I don't know. Has anybody else had those problems? Kareem, you had that problem with IT, or is it the woman thing is just not bullet getting in their way every time? Is Kareem there again?
I'm not familiar with that issue, but I am here. I do have a question though.
Okay, go ahead.
My question was essentially, if I'm understanding, you were speaking about trying to prevent a run on the banks with the information getting out, correct?
Could you speak up a little bit?
Can we turn on the people a bit? If I'm not mistaken, you were speaking about trying to prevent a run on the banks with the banks not letting the information out and not
Yeah,
pursuing.
that is one of the possibilities where clients may say, well, I see a Royal Bank employee being dragged for the courts, and a second and a third, and all these for stealing.
Right. So skipping to when you said that the person would have to do like the 200 page.
Could you speak up a little bit? Because my thing up to 100, I can't hear you.
Going back to where you said that the person would have to do like a essay on why the customers left.
Mm-hmm.
How do they then explain if bad publicity is the reason why the customers left?
Because remember now, we are required to have a relationship, just how we're no longer just accounts. Years ago, the strategy came out is, you must know your customer and you are supposed to have a relationship with this client. So you are supposed to call this client up on the phone, and on the account closing form, there is a reason this account is closed. And they always tell you, try not to say, except that there's no reason at all, or that I don't know, you have to make like suggestions. But people are very vocal. For the most part, people told the manager or the relationship manager that, and they just didn't want to record it. And so you would see a few coming in and saying, well, the bank employees are thieves. And so you would have to ask the manager to coach, coach the client through that, or give them some information or ask them why they feel this way or what have you.
Thank you. I know I've been on like literally on the bank line when people say, boy, let's take RBC for example. RBC is closing down. Don't leave your money in here too long. I've been standing on the bank line hearing these conversations. So, and I don't even know if they link to incidences of stealing within the bank. Just bad PR.
Yeah, bad customer service. And again, let me just say, when I was at Royal Bank, we were owned by Canada. They're now owned by Trinidad, and Trinidad has enforced a lot of their policy and procedure and some of their culture on us, and Bahamians just do business differently, and we have a stronger culture. We have a higher standard of customer service, and we are paid more for the work that the standard that we maintain. And so them trying to inflict their culture on us is why the service is terrible right now. So I just want to put that in, that I'm not a part of that, era of terrible service.
I wasn't a part of that item as well.
Yeah, right. And we talking about Greg
Jamaican. Yeah. Trinidad sent me home, I know, but them.
Yeah, so Finco had 129 employees, and now they have 29 carrying out the full brunt of the service. And so imagine that, letting, what is that, more than 90% of the staff go, and the policy and procedures and the clients are still there. So that's why the service is terrible, terrible. Yeah, but I speak highly of Royal Bankers in the days when I was there. Service was it used to be better. I don't know if you all can remember 10 years ago, but It used to be better, but now I am appalled. But I still support Royal Bank for many personal reasons. Okay. Okay, so risk management should be a part of the overall firm-wide GRC system and controls within the firm. It should be presented throughout the whole of the enterprise, from the board of directors down through all of its activities. Everybody business, everybody has a part to play. So risk assessment and planning, and then we should get some of the entry-level staff involved. We have a whole team. Let's use their very young brains, their very innovative brains, but we don't, and we are afraid to take suggestions from them. We try to do everything ourselves. We hoard all this information. We don't want to train anybody, and then we say we are burnt out. Okay, so start to unwind all of these things that hold us up, that cause us to be burnt out in the end and causes the institution to fail. Okay, so risk assessment and planning, a firm faces risks at all levels, whether from global issues based on market conditions or environmental issues specific to one location. Hurricanes. Firms cannot plan for or identify every single risk that might have an impact, but they should monitor and analyze potential risks. And again, when we look at the CPI index, which is the corruption perception index, prior to Hurricane Maria, Puerto Rico had a corruption perception index of 65. Hurricane Maria came in, blew out, the infrastructure of the electricity and damaged Puerto Rico severely. Donald Trump did not support or send sufficient financing down there. And so their corruption perception index dropped tremendously because they had to do whatever it takes to try and get the country up and running. They couldn't just live without power. That's a basic necessity. And so it does not have to be, a deficiency within. It could be an external cause that caused, a country or the bank or what have you. And so I was very concerned when Hurricane Dorian happened, and I rewatched that for corruption perception index. It at least it stayed. It was at 65 and it went up actually to 66. The higher it is, the less corrupt your country is seen to the world. And so the net effect of that is that we have institutions that say we don't do business with countries that have a corruption perception index lower than 30, because the lower you are, the more corrupt your country is. And so just like when I went to New York and we did try to open the account, we don't do business with countries that are high risk, and we couldn't prove that we weren't high risk. That's the net effect. And so that means we continue to pay Switzerland $100,000 when we had the staff, the infrastructure, the system, everything in place, but we could not get the accounts open. Okay, so risk identification and analysis. This is where there's a need for more detailed analysis of the likelihood that known risks will become issues, and if they do, the possible impacts. The impacts of the identified risks need to be quantified so the mitigation strategies can be developed to be used in the event that the risk does not, in fact, materialize. In this context, mitigation refers to assessing the ways to manage or eliminate risks. And again, there's no way to eliminate that. So don't be stressed out and overwhelmed and, with people not following policy and procedure and whatever. There's no way to, eliminate it. The key is to be knowledgeable, know your job, never say, I don't know. Do what you were supposed to do, follow the policy and procedure. If there's a gap, I know that there's a gap. I reported the gap and it was never fixed. I reported it to the manager. Here's my email. And so that way you save yourself, because things happen. We don't live in perfect, but you have to be able to answer what happens. A lot of times people do not know. This is audit pointing this out to them. They didn't do their own self-assessment. No control in place, or the control in place, and they don't know what the control is. People, there are a lot of verbiage like risk management and, enhanced due diligence and PEP. Somebody didn't know, You know, imagine they're asking, like they said, you know, the inspector asks the pastor, what do they do for the past? The pastor asks, what is the past? You know, so of course, if it was time for to go to jail, then if something was wrong, that pastor would have been going to jail. Right? Okay, so developing a risk response strategy, this should be developed alongside the risk identification activities. This is where a firm needs to have plans and strategies to deal with the impact of risk materialization. These strategies will also help the firm to return to normal operations as soon as possible. Developing this approach also allows the firm to include analysis of any risk-related opportunities, which could, for example, include a review or overhaul of products or services, not only to eliminate any identified risk, but to capitalize on opportunities that the risk analysis has revealed. Okay, and again, with like they're trying to put in infrastructure for cryptocurrency, and you know there's a lot of risk associated with that, and so you want to ensure you have sufficient safeguards in place or controls in place to mitigate the amount of risk that comes along with that. Okay. Okay, so any questions or concerns? No? That's much. Everybody get 100%. Everybody know what Ms. Bullard talking about, and we could go and write our papers and apply this to our in our institutions. Let's see, this is exactly what happened. All this information is out there. It is a lot. It is very comprehensive. I'm trying to scale this down as much as possible. But if I gave you all a test on this, if I was coming into your institutions to see the controls you have in place, Emma, what controls you have in place regarding pets? Emma, no response. Katrina, data protection. Are you familiar with any data protection in your organization?
If I'm familiar with it, you mean reference the policies or?
Yes, reference the policies.
A little.
That's what you can tell the auditor, a little. Go get Katrina's CB. When I go and pull your CB now, you have sufficient education and experience to hold the position that you're in.
You're asking me if do I?
Yeah, because this is what happens. This is how it happens. They interview you, they ask you a question, and you say a little.
Ms. Bullard, can I give a response?
Okay, I guess what, Katrina, you have anything else to say?
A reference. No, Lavon could speak.
Say it for then, Lavon. Say it, but no, but I'm just trying to prepare you.
Yeah,
you know, and this is what we're talking about in this chapter. Yes, it's a lot of information. Yeah, yes, we still have to listen. We have to retain it, and then we have to go further, do research into our jobs to make sure that we are protected. Okay, go ahead, Lavon.
Okay, a lot of this stuff is live for me, y'all, because I work in a financial institution. But I know with data protection, you have a filing room that controls the data, the application of it to the files, and the control of the files. They would control the scanning of the data, only certain people. You would have a team inside the filing room that would control it, that would be able to delete items placed on the files and to change them around and whatnot. Is that a form of control?
Yes, yes, and we remember we talked about some of a challenge. Remember I told you we at one point we had to turn off the files because people put them in the shredder.
Right, so that
and they moved information, right?
Right, so when you have audit, there's a central person that communicates with the filing room that pulls the files and ensures that they're in order so that things aren't removed.
Okay,
The thing should be in place before the audit comes in and sure after review from the team leads and the department heads.
okay, good. Okay, who is SC? No SC? Okay, S. Calma. No S. Calma? Okay. Jermaine,
Hey, Ms. Bullard.
okay, tell me about confidentiality in your institution.
Mm. Well, I know when we get our yearly or bi-yearly training on compliance, I know confidentiality is a little part of that where, you know, we can't give out information or divulge any information uh, of certain things to certain parties. That's a part of the training for compliance that we have.
Okay, so what you will write about confidentiality in your paper?
Well, I got to look at what the central bank mandates, and then I got to go from there, I guess.
Okay. V. Badel, are you there? No? Okay.
Yes. Yes, I am here. I was trying to unmute this.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, what can you tell us about confidentiality?
Okay, one of the first thing you do when you come to work in the place I work is they make you sign the confidentiality agreement, and that's for the staff. And then regarding to the clients is we have like not everybody have access to the files. They have some policies in place about, like, for instance, the actual physical files, how to store that, who people have access to them. And if you need something, or auditors in Argentina, for instance, need something, it's only these couple people who have access to that information.
Okay, so it depends on your level.
Yes, ma'am. It's depend of
Okay.
your level. And now by traders or back office or that, this is just that information that they have access to know how much is trading or whatever. But for instance, certain levels of clients, if someone from the back office want go to see their account or see how much they have in the cost to the account or in the cash account, they don't have access to that.
Okay, so that's a control that protects the data and also protects confidentiality by segregating it by levels.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay, great. Okay, good. I just checking to see if you're there. And
No, I'm here, I'm alive. I just was having troubles trying to mute this.
okay, good. Okay, so yeah, next week I'll call on you. So again, we have 2 more classes left, and I really hope that this is, beneficial and you can retain some of this and this is making sense. So read the next 25 pages. That should take you into the appendix. And like I said, it seems that chapter 5 is based on the who, which is the policy, and then the what we do is, which is the procedure part. So as you go into the appendices, they tell you the different, that you should have a compliance plan in place, and you should have a legislative matrix. That's why I always try to tell you where it comes from, and which parts of the law is affected by it. Okay, and then you should have a standard or a model that you follow, and you should be able to speak knowledgeably. We use the Costco model, and I think that was it Katrina or Emma that read about that model and walked us through, and that's the most popular one that I see most. I saw 3 or 4 organizations who follow the Costco model. Okay, so just to give you some ideas when you get in these positions that you know, or if you cross-train, these are the questions that you want to ask. Or, you know, if you are the head of a department and you need to do your own, you know, for the enterprise wide, you have to give your feedback based on your department. And you don't have the risk background or the compliance background. This is the models that they use, and these are the steps that you know that you could follow to help assist you, because a lot of the time they push the responsibility on the compliance. I need you to help me, or rest you. I've never done this before, so I can only list my functions. I don't know what controls to put in place. I don't know what model to follow or what questions I should answer. So all of this helps no matter what department you're in. Okay?
Okay. A question. You say which page? Sorry.
Which page in terms of what?
You say we need to. This might.
Oh, okay. So yeah, so we would have gone up to page like 250. So read up to page 275.
Perfect. Thank you.
Right. Okay. Okay. Any other questions or concerns? No? Okay. Only Ms. Bullard is actually to participate. Lavon, Tira, Kim?
No, we right there, Ms. Bullard.
No, I just asking only in the other lecturers don't actually to participate.
Yes, ma'am.
No, we have to participate.
Mm-hmm. And you're acting like only me, nobody in this class. Okay. All right.
I'll be listening, you know, we taking everything you say, we listening.
Okay, but like I said, I just don't want to talk. I want it to be relevant, and I want you to be able to retain it and then be able to apply it.
Okay.
Okay?
Appreciate that.
Okay, great. Okay, so y'all have a fabulous week, and I'll see you all again next week.
Good night, Ms. Bullard.
Okay,
Okay,
good night.
Good night, Ms.
Good night.
Bullard.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
Julia. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.